Moroccan exports. Terry nodded to the security guard at the front entrance of the embassy doors. He walked quickly down the hall past the receptionist's desk, the oil portrait of the Queen and the maple leaf flag. The reading room was almost deserted. Only 3 other people were sitting at the long wooden table. He went over the newspaper rack and selected the Vancouver Sun, Toronto Telegram, Montreal Star, and the Hamilton Spectator. During his stay in London, he came to the Canadian Embassy about once a week to keep in touch with events happening back home. He read the Hamilton Spectator last and was almost finished when he noticed a 3-line story on the back pages. It said simply that Peter S., age 26, had been arrested for possession of marijuana. It said further that his trial was of 4 days, or 3 days previously, since the paper Terry was reading was a week old. Terry put down the paper and sank back in the leather chair. The silence in the room was deafening. He forcibly restrained himself from shouting. He experienced a wide variety of emotions in quick succession. Shock because it was completely unsuspected, pain because Peter was a good friend of his, and somewhat guiltily relief because his responsibilities were over. The story began 3 months previously in Hamilton. Terry had been dealing then. He knew he was being watched by the police, but was cautious enough to avoid them. Still, a sixth sense told him he was being enmeshed in a net, and the trap was closing quickly. He decided to leave for Europe until things cooled down. Peter met him in a restaurant and handed him $400. Terry agreed to send hashish back from North Africa, timing the shipment to coincide with the Christmas mail rush, to minimize the risk of it being intercepted. He went to Montreal and New York first, then flew to Luxembourg. He hitchhiked through Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and France. He took a train through Spain, and it was in a third-class coach heading south from Madrid that he met his first contact. He was an Arab in his late 20s who introduced himself as Mohammed Ben Lalla. Mohammed recognized a mutual interest in marijuana and revealed that he earned his living smuggling keef from Morocco to France, Holland, and Germany. Terry revealed the purpose of his visit to Morocco was to buy quantity hashish. Mohammed said there was no hashish in Morocco, there was only keef, and his brother-in-law grew the best. He pointed out that his hometown, Tétouan, had far fewer tourists than Tangiers, and accordingly sold their keef much cheaper. He invited Terry to spend a couple of days as his guest at Tétouan. Terry agreed, but insisted he would buy only hashish because it was easier to ship and more profitable to sell. Then he tried to sleep to the jarring of the train. In third class, the benches are wooden and hard. The countryside was getting drier, and there was a noticeable increase in Moorish influence in the architecture. They reached Algeciras that evening and shared an inexpensive room in a hotel near the waterfront. Mohammed talked ceaselessly about his country and his experiences in Europe. Terry listened, but was too tired by the long train journey from Marseille to ask questions. In the morning they walked down to the docks and peeled a banana and an orange for breakfast before they boarded the ferry for Ceuta. The Mediterranean was blue and calm. They stood at the iron railing at the stern of the ship, watching the seagulls of the ship dive bomb for scraps of garbage thrown through the galley porthole. It took several hours to complete the crossing. Terry moved to the bow of the ship and waited with anticipation. He felt a tingling in his veins. For the moment he had left Europe behind, and the mysterious green continent of Africa awaited him. At last he made out the shoreline, and tall, elegant date palms of Spanish Morocco. They disembarked and went through a superficial customs check, although this territory was still legally a colony of Spain. Terry expected to take a bus, which was the cheapest form of transportation. Mohammed Ben Lalla refused vehemently, as he would be losing face, and insisted they share a taxi with 4 other passengers. The pride of the East proved stronger than the economy of the West, and Terry reluctantly agreed. It was only a short drive to Moroccan customs, where Terry got another stamp in his passport and changed some traveler's checks to dirham currency. They changed taxis and sped along the asphalt highway into the hills. The green belt along the shores of the Mediterranean was now a long ways behind them. The hills were sparse and dry and rust-colored. The only vegetation consisted of sparse tufts of grass and isolated thorn bushes. Mohammed nudged his arm. "These hills are the beginning of the Moyen Atlas Range," he said proudly. It was stifling hot in the car. The windows were kept closed to protect the passengers from dust. They sweated uncomfortably, and the interior of the cab took on a distinct smell. Even Ben Lola, who talked incessantly, lapsed into silence. The next 5 hours they stopped only once, so the men could relieve themselves by the side of the road. They reached Tetuan in the late afternoon. They paid off the driver, and Terry followed Mohammed to the inner city. They passed under a stone archway and entered the welcome shade of the Kasbah. The streets here were only 6 feet wide, large enough for a mule, but certainly not a car. They were covered overhead with the same mud brick mortar as the buildings on either side, and only an occasional beam of sunlight seeped through. The pavement was rough cobblestone worn into the dust. Terry immediately became lost in the twisted maze of alleyways, and placed full trust in Mohammed as his guide. They walked for at least 10 minutes, and Terry guessed they must be getting close, for Ben Lala was now verbally welcomed by all the children and shopkeepers he met. Finally, Ben Lala motioned to an entrance in the wall. To the left there was a circular staircase, and a small shelter to the right which stank of urine. "This is the washroom," Ben Lala indicated expectantly. Terry must have looked dubious, for